This video is presented by mybookie.ag. What's up, guys? We have finally arrived to UFC 274 predictions, one of the most violent fight cards of all time. Pure violence coming out of the lightweight division on that main card. Charles Oliveira versus Justin Gaethje, Michael Chandler versus Tony Ferguson, Donald Cerrone versus Joe Lauzon. Can you ask for more entertainment? Between all of those 6 fighters, there are 134 finishes and only 27 decisions. Man, I cannot wait for this. The prelims are pretty nice as well. There's some good fights throughout there, like Chaos Williams versus Randy Brown is pretty good, Brandon Royval versus Matthew Schnell, but it's really the main card that's carrying the whole thing. A bunch of legends on there like Donald Cerrone versus Joe Lauzon, Shogun Rua is on the card, Tony Ferguson, Charles Oliveira, Justin Gaethje, Michael Chandler, Namajunas and Carla Esparza, just a bunch of fighters that in the future could go down in the Hall of Fame. Starting it all off with Donald Cerrone versus Joe Lauzon. For all the old school fans, it must boggle your mind that these two guys never fought each other before. They've been in the UFC together in the same division for such a long time, over 10 years together, and they never fought each other. Maybe because Cerrone was always like a top 10 fighter and Joe Lauzon never really cracked there. But I'm glad to see the fight game put together, even though they are both over the hill. It should be a pretty fun fight. Both guys are known for their finishes. Put everything on the line. That should be a fun one. It's good matchmaking by the UFC in my opinion. And of course the rematch between Shogun and Ovis St. Preux. I don't know how I feel about this one given how old Shogun is. I mean, when OSP knocked out Shogun before with the whole skateboard in the cage, people back then thought that Shogun was old. Now they're rematching again. Shogun's 40, OSP is 39, but he hasn't aged the way Shogun has. Should be an interesting one. Both guys are known for their finishes as well. Michael Chandler versus Tony Ferguson. This is one that a lot of fans are excited for, especially if Tony can bring back himself. If he can show up right, this fight is probably the most exciting of the entire card. Both guys always bring it, just like the other 4 fighters we just talked about. Tony and Michael Chandler put it all on the line. They are the epitome of violence. Then we have the 2 championship fights headlining the card. First, the rematch between Namajunas and Carla Esparza. For people that don't remember before, Carla actually submitted Rose to become the first strawweight champion in UFC history. They were both very young in their careers. Rose was especially young, didn't even have 10 fights professionally at the time. But even back then, coming off a loss, everybody knew that Rose was going to be something one day. And now we have an interesting stylistic collision again that could run some trouble for both fighters. This is definitely a fight that could go either way. And same thing with the main event. Oliveira and Gaethje has been talked about for some time now. Even before Oliveira fought Dustin Poirier, people were still imagining how could Charles beat Justin Gaethje and how could Justin Gaethje beat Charles. The fact that it's going on this Saturday is so exciting to me, man. Either guy can win the fight. Their strengths are their opponent's weaknesses, and it might just have to come down to the mental aspect of the fight. Who's able to make the adjustments, who is not going to crack, and who can make the right decisions in the fight with how heated it's going to be. And with that, the prospect of the night, in my opinion, has to go to Chaos Williams. Ever since his loss to Michel Pereira, he keeps looking better. He's super powerful, super dangerous, he's still kind of young, only has 15 fights in his professional career. There's a lot of growth for Kalen Williams, and one of the best fighters coming out of Michigan. The fighter of the night, in my opinion, would probably have to be Charles Oliveira, the defending lightweight champion. He's chasing history. Beating Justin Gaethje puts him with one of the only fighters in lightweight history to have at least 2 title defenses. And he's chasing to be the greatest lightweight of all time. Beating Gaethje's not going to give him that, but another win or 2 puts him in the discussion. The stake of the night. There's 2 guys I got to put here. Number 1, as hard as it is to say, Tony Ferguson. Tony's in a hot seat because if he loses to Michael Chandler, that probably spells the end of him as a contender. The guy turned 38 years old this year. He's probably the oldest lightweight on the entire roster in a division that doesn't really have a lot of 38-year-olds. Once you hit that age, usually as a lightweight, you're done. And the way Michael Chandler will most likely beat him is by a devastating knockout or something. If Tony loses to Chandler, it's probably done for him. And the same goes with Donald Cerrone. Donald Cerrone has not won since 2019. He hasn't won in his last 6 fights. And he goes and loses to someone like Joe Lauzon. He'll always be a fun fighter. It could perhaps get him cut by the UFC. As weird as it would be for Donald Cerrone to not be fighting in the UFC, if you go on a 7-fight skid, I mean, man, that's rough. But the banger of the night, the most exciting fight on the entire card, it really depends on how Tony shows up. If Tony shows up right, it is Michael Chandler versus Tony Ferguson. Michael Chandler came into the UFC looking to just put on wars against the best fighters in the world, looking to implement his will against the best fighters in the world and see who has more. He's super explosive and powerful. He's great submissions, great wrestler, fights at a very high velocity. And Tony Ferguson is the king of violence. the unorthodox attacks that just rip their opponents to shreds. That should be an interesting one, man. And then the fight of the night, in my opinion, would have to go to that main event. It's so enticing, technically, skillfully, willfully, and intellectually. These guys are gonna have to make the right decisions because one mistake and it's over. And with that, let's get right to the first fight. Donald Cerrone versus Joe Lauzon. I love this one, man. I'm a huge fan of both guys, especially Joe Lauzon. I've been watching this guy ever since he was in The Ultimate Fighter. And I remember the days when he knocked out Jens Pulver out of nowhere. Some random guy, looks like a nerd, goes and knocks out a former champion in his UFC debut less than a minute into the fight. That's how wild Joe Lauzon is. He has great jiu-jitsu, he has dangerous striking. He's not technically sound to that level. Donald Cerrone is definitely more technical on the feet, and he's bigger as well and longer. But the way that Lauzon puts it on you is just like putting his body into the fire. He throws himself at you with big overhands, big left hooks, lunges, punches from a distance, and sometimes it can catch his opponents off guard. Cerrone doesn't have the same chin he had before, but is still pretty solid. Even welterweights like Alex Morono, who has a ton of first-round knockouts, had a hard time putting Cerrone away. He had to put together a bunch of big overhands and hooks just to hurt Cerrone enough for the fight to get called off. Lauzon is much smaller than Alex Morono, and he is smaller than Donald Cerrone, but he does have a lot of power, so he can make some things work. Lauzon had an interesting thought about the fight. He said, "I'm not as good of a striker as Cerrone, but I'm better on the ground." I don't even know if that's true. Cowboy might get the better of Lauzon when it comes to jiu-jitsu. Fighters have a hard time with Cerrone's guard. He is so flexible. He snatches up triangles in a blink of an eye. It's so hard to get around his guard. It's so hard to break through it. And yes, Lauzon, I would say, is more of a scrambler on the ground. He's better in different positions. But when it comes to playing the guard, I think Cowboy has Lauzon beat. And that's if Lauzon could get Cerrone to the ground, who he himself has great takedown defense. It's hard to get Cowboy down. If Cowboy goes on his back, it's most likely him pulling guard or him getting dropped. He might even have better wrestling than Lauzon. For a guy who took down Darren Till, who's a middleweight today, and really amplifying his wrestling skills to another level, Cowboy might control who gets taken to the ground and who doesn't. And if he doesn't decide to take Joe Lauzon down, which actually might be a thing, he might try to shoot in that blast double leg. If he doesn't do that, and he wants to make it a standing contest and go for that bonus, his boxing defense worries me for how dangerous Lauzon is with his hands. He has to keep that jab out there. He needs to keep the kicks out there as well. Head kicks, just like Anthony Pettis showed in the past, can really catch Joe Lauzon off guard, especially when you offset him with your hands. And Donald Cerrone has a very sneaky high kick. It's not your traditional high kick, man. He snaps it from the knee. He brings his leg upward and then snaps his shin out there. It has a weird timing to it, and it's incredibly quick. So ultimately, my prediction for this fight, I am going to go with Donald Cerrone. I think he's going to get that win, and I think he's going to win by a knockout. Joe Lauzon's chin is just not there anymore. I think Cerrone's jabs are going to be extremely damaging and potentially ends the fight due to a high kick in the third round, and I do kind of agree with the odds here. Minus 180 on my bookie for Donald Cerrone seems pretty spot on. And then we go to Michael Chandler versus Tony Ferguson. Man, I'm going to be sweating watching this fight. I really don't want to see Tony Ferguson get flatlined out there, because if anybody can do it, it is Michael Chandler. He's the most powerful lightweight we've probably ever seen before. And when he throws that right hand, his entire body goes behind it. All the force, all the speed, all the leverage, right onto Tony Ferguson's jaw. And with the fact that Tony's taking so much damage in his career, I don't know if his chin is there to take a Chandler right hand. But on the other side of it, Chandler's not defensively responsible. And if Tony actually is not gun shy, because that was his issue in his last fight against Beneil Dariush, Tony did not do anything. He didn't throw anything forward. He didn't even want to walk forward. He really didn't do much to threaten Beneil Dariush at all. And that's very uncharacteristic for Tony to not be offensive. If he's offensive in this fight with Chandler, uses the elbows, uses the uppercuts, uses the front kicks, a bunch of the jabs and 1-2s, the awkward, unorthodox style that he has just flows in the fight, Chandler could get torn up from many different angles. He throws a right hand and he misses because Tony does have a very weird way of defending punches. He rolls awkwardly with them and stuff. He could potentially land spinning back elbows on Michael Chandler, potentially time up in the clinch, start hitting with elbows there as well, and from a distance he has such a major reach advantage. He could just simply keep a jab on Chandler, but the issue with Ferguson that he has, when he's doing that, when he's trying to keep his reach on the opponent, he extends with his upper body. He moves his upper body first before moving his feet, which is backwards of what they teach you in boxing. I've talked about this before, and that's what got him caught against Justin Gaethje. He would lean forward with his punches, and Justin Gaethje would just pull away and counter him. Chandler is not the same kind of counter puncher that Justin Gaethje is, so Tony's offense is actually going to be more effective against Chandler than it was against Gaethje, because Chandler is a front foot fighter. He wants to be the aggressor, and his leg kick's going to be damaging. His right hand is going to be devastating. Tony's got to watch out for those two things. Now, where the fight gets interesting is the wrestling. Because both these guys might wrestle. We haven't seen too much of it in the UFC from both of them, but they are excellent wrestlers, man. And Tony's been talking about his wrestling coach from college. He's bringing him into this fight. He said he's always been training with him, but he's bringing him into the fight with him. And in an interview, he did say that he's going to take Chandler down. Tony might shoot his first takedown ever since he fought RDA. Yeah, Tony Ferguson has not shot in a takedown in over 5 years. And the takedowns he shot in previously against RDA, against Enson Barboza, against Josh Thompson and Gleison Tibau weren't really meaningful shots. They weren't meaningful takedowns the way he used to shoot in takedowns. But when you see Tony Ferguson actually shooting for meaningful takedowns, the guy can wrestle, man. Most of his takedowns in the UFC, when you look at the Gleison Tibau fight and the Abel Trujillo fight, they're snap downs. They're actually him defending takedowns and then snapping them down to the mat. But when he fought Eve Edwards and Ramsey Nijem, and even before the UFC, he has excellent chain wrestling. Usually opponents are able to stop the first shot, but not the second and third. He switches up so well from different angles and ankle picks the opponent often. Michael Chandler is so explosive, I believe he would be able to stop the first takedown attempt, but I don't know how he's going to be able to chain wrestle with Tony Ferguson. That's only if Tony decides to wrestle in the fight, bring it back to his game, because that's a whole part of his skill set that he's went away from for so many years. Tony Ferguson is a well-rounded fighter, but oftentimes he doesn't use all of his skills. So I wonder how he's going to be able to wrestle with Michael Chandler if he goes that route, and it's really going to mix up with his striking and jiu-jitsu. Tony Ferguson only really uses BJJ when he gets taken to the ground. Why not try to take the opponent down and use it offensively while on top? Because the days he used to take down Eve Edwards and Ramsey Nijem before the UFC, he really didn't have jiu-jitsu to him. That was before he was training with Eddie Bravo. So when he got to the ground, he was only wrestling. He was cradling his opponents to transition on them, and then laying ground and pound shots. He was always looking to get into full mount. Imagine with the BJJ skills he has today, combined with the wrestling offense. It might be an entirely new Tony Ferguson we've never seen before, but that's only by his decision. We know Michael Chandler could shoot in takedowns. He's powerful with that blast double. He could chain wrestle as well, but he really will start gassing out if he goes that route with Tony. And I do believe Chandler will take Tony to the ground. If he decides to take Tony down, I'm pretty sure he's going to secure it. And people don't know about Chandler's BJJ. The guy is great on the ground. He has great submissions. He has great understanding of how to defend submissions. The biggest weakness about Chandler's ground game is his ability to pass the guard. Sometimes he gets stuck in the guard, and that could be an issue fighting Tony Ferguson, because Tony has those elbows from the bottom that even Kevin Lee said completely changed the fight. When Tony was landing elbows off of his back, it really affected Kevin Lee's game. And not only that, Tony has great triangle chokes, he has great arm bars from the bottom and stuff, but ultimately what this all comes down to is if Tony Ferguson is in the right mindset and he shows up like he used to. If he fights the way he fought Anthony Pettis and Donald Cerrone, I actually do favor him to win the fight. But if he doesn't, and he shows up as the most recent Tony when he fought Benito Dariush, when he fought Charles Oliveira, I think Chandler knocks him out. So it really comes down to, can I predict how Tony Ferguson is going to show up? That's really what it comes down to. With the age factor, he hasn't fought in over a year. He keeps saying that he's better. He keeps saying that he's a different guy now. I never like these kind of signs when fighters say these things. That means that Tony Ferguson is most likely not going to show up the way he used to. He perhaps might not be as offensively minded, and if he's not, he potentially is going to get finished. So I'm going to go with Michael Chandler, and I'm going to go by a first round knockout. I know some people might think that Tony's too tough for that, but judging off the Dariush fight and knowing how Michael Chandler approaches, the collision is going to be scary, man. And ultimately, I do kind of agree with the odds here. Minus 360 for Michael Chandler. That can seem correct if Tony shows up the way we think he is. And then we go to the co-main event, and I'm super excited about this one. Rose Namajunas versus Carla Esparza 2, the long-time rematch. Both these fighters' first fight in the UFC were against each other. How crazy is that? And now they're fighting each other again 7 years down the road. Carla Esparza submitted Rose Namajunas in that fight. Rose actually had a pretty good early start, but she gassed herself out going for some crazy kicks out there, and Esparza ultimately got her to the ground and just suffocated her. Rose has definitely changed. Rose is a completely different fighter, whereas Carla is kind of the same fighter with a lot of fine-tuning to her. Her style is the same. She fights the same way. She shoots takedowns very similarly. She has similar kind of pressure, but now she's bigger than she was. Carla was super small when she won the belt. She definitely packed up on muscle, so her takedowns are going to be harder for Rose to defend. The drawback, though, is we've seen her gas out. When Carla was smaller, she never used to gas out, even in 5-round fights. When she fought Alexa Grasso, she was gassing out in the 3rd round. That may be because Alexa Grasso is so big, it's harder for a smaller fighter like Carla to hold someone big like that down for 3 rounds, because Grasso now fights in the flyweight division. She's huge for strawweight. Perhaps that was a big reason for it, but the muscle has to be a drawback as well. You cannot build up on muscle and only see benefits. There are always going to be negatives as well. So in the early parts of the fight, I could see Carla's takedowns being a huge problem for Rose to deal with, because Rose also doesn't have great takedown defense. Even someone like Zhang Weili, who is well-rounded, but let's be honest, not near the wrestler that Carla is. She was able to take Rose down pretty easily 5 times in their fight. Jessica Andrade was able to get her meaningful takedowns on Rose. Michelle Waterson took her to the ground as well, and none of these fighters can wrestle like Carla can. So 100%, if the fight doesn't get finished early, let's say Rose head kicks her or something, or lands a 1-2 and rocks her because Carla does not have head movement, she stands still on the feet and she can be really easily hit. Her only defensive strikes is just shooting in for takedowns, and that actually is effective against Rose specifically, but against other fighters like Joanna or maybe Zhang Weili, Carla would have a hard time doing that to them. But against Rose, it could make Rose kind of tentative to throw out some strikes. Because whenever she does, there's a huge possibility Carla shoots in on her and she just needs to create contact. Because Carla understands she's like the smallest fighter in this division, so she cannot overpower everybody. She uses her technical wrestling to an advantage, constantly switching up the grips, constantly going from double to single, single to double, lateral drops, and all other variations. And once it goes to the ground, Rose can be pretty dangerous, man. She has really good jiu-jitsu, but mostly it's been shown when she gets on top. On the bottom, fighters like Zhang Weili, like Carla Esparza back in the day, even Jessica Andrade, these fighters are able to smash her guard. Like, she wasn't really too dangerous off her back against these fighters. She really just tries to stand up and get back to the striking. And Carla is especially good against submissions. She's really good at defending them. She's been defending them against some of the best fighters in the world. But there have been some scares in the past. Alexa Grasso almost got an armbar on Carla in the 3rd round, which really came out of nowhere. And it was a fully extended armbar, but Carla was able to get her arm out of there because of how short she is. Her arms are really short, so sometimes it's hard to get a good grip on her. And she stays so compact, she creates an even smaller target to submit. Usually it's like these longer, lanky fighters that have a harder time getting out of submissions. But with someone like Carla, it might be hard for Rose to actually catch her with an armbar, catch her with a triangle and stuff. And as the rounds are riding out, Carla is going to have more of an advantage the further it goes. So I could definitely see the scenario that Carla keeps taking Rose down every single round, has a ton of top control, lands some good ground and pound shots, and then later as Rose is gassing out under that pressure, Carla could finish her or even win on the decision. That can absolutely happen here. And as we've seen consistently, Rose slows down in the fight, especially when it gets into like the 3rd or even championship rounds. Her footwork is a lot slower, she gets a lot more plodding, and that makes it even easier for someone like Carla to get takedowns on her. Rose is going to be the most dangerous early in the fight, where her movement is constant. She might actually make it hard for Carla to get in on her legs because of how well she moves. And the thing is, again, Carla does not have good striking defense. She just does not. Almost like a punching bag sometimes. It's weird because she doesn't even like react to punches sometimes. You'll see her with her hands down and getting cracked in the face. It's weird. Imagine now Rose doing that to you, who has a lot of power for a strawweight and has the head kicks to go with it. Carla could be in a ton of trouble if she does not get those takedowns early. Ultimately, my prediction for this fight, I'm going to go with Carla Esparza, and I'm going to go by a 4th round submission. I know, everybody knows me, I'm a huge Rose Namajunas fan. I love watching her fights. I'm a huge fan of her style, but it's just hard for me to see her defend the takedowns. And Rose gets tired in fights pretty quickly, especially if she's going to be on the ground. Against Zhang Weili, she was really gassing out from the takedowns. And Carla has a whole different kind of top pressure compared to Zhang Weili, and way better takedowns. It's not a given fight. I'm not super confident in Carla's chances, as I do believe on the feet Rose tears her apart, absolutely destroys her when it comes to the striking. If Rose had like Joanna takedown defense, Rose shuts Carla down no problem at all. This would be one of her easiest fights. But the fact that she gets taken down so easily, and people haven't seen it too often because of who Rose has fought, I think a lot of people might be surprised at the way the fight plays out. So I'm going to go with Carla Esparza. She is a big underdog, and I'm going to go by a 4th round submission. Might even be 5th round. And interesting to see that Rose is over a 2-1 favorite. A lot of people are writing off Carla Esparza on this one. And with that, we get into the fight everybody's been waiting for. Charles Oliveira versus Justin Gaethje. I cannot express enough how excited I am for this, and how scared I am for both fighters. The first one to make a mistake loses. That's how this fight's going to go. If Oliveira makes a mistake on the feet, he gets knocked out. If Gaethje makes a mistake losing posture, or not defending a takedown, or whatever it is, Oliveira's going to get his back and choke him out. And here's the other thing, man. Oliveira could even beat Gaethje on the feet. He's a sharper striker than Gaethje is. When it comes to the form, his precision with the shots, his technique is beautiful to watch. It's just his defense. That's his problem. He does not move his head. And it has to be because of his vision. There's no way he just sits still in front of punches like that. It has to be he can't see them. As crazy as that is. I mean, Oliveira said that he's pretty much blind. Literally said that. When he walks around, he needs glasses because if he doesn't, he's almost blind. he is super nearsighted, so punches that come out from a range can be pretty hard for him to distinguish how close those punches are, and that's why he probably gets cracked before even trying to defend them. He needs stuff to be right in front of his face in order to see it, and Gaethje's not going to give him that kind of advantage. Gaethje's going to be slamming punches from a distance, try to be kind of patient, pick out his shots, kind of similar to how he fought Tony Ferguson, and that's what I honestly think here. I think Gaethje's going to have to fight this fight the way he fought Tony. As ironic as that is, a lot of people compare Oliveira to Tony Ferguson as like Tony 2.0. Gaethje would have to fight him similarly. Oliveira is also long like Tony. Not as long, but he's going to be longer than Justin Gaethje is. So perhaps he's going to have to wait out from a distance and try to counter some of the overextensions. But that's the issue. Oliveira does not overextend like that. He can if he's super pressuring, if he just tries to run into you like he did against Dustin Poirier, like he did against Tony Ferguson, but he really didn't do it against Michael Chandler. That's an interesting one because he knew with Chandler he couldn't pressure him the same way. Chandler's a hard guy to push back unless you hurt him. Gaethje might be the same thing though. Gaethje could be hard to push back sometimes if you don't have that wrestling threat like Khabib does. So maybe Oliveira also knows, okay, I can't bulldoze through this guy like that. I can't just run into him with a bunch of volume and pressure. I'm going to have to pick my shot from a distance a little bit, but also keep some pressure on him, similar to how I tried to do against David Tamer, who's also known as a good counterpuncher. So these two guys might have some distance between them. And I know a lot of people are going to say, okay, Gaethje's leg kick's going to take part, but is it really? How effective are his leg kicks going to be in this one? Because Oliveira is one of the only guys Gaethje's ever fought before that's good against leg kicks. He checks kicks often because of his natural stance. He keeps that Muay Thai stance. Lead leg is light, picks it up, ready to check at all times, and he can do that because nobody wants to take him to the ground. So he could be especially hard to hit from a distance with leg kicks because of that. Oliveira might actually have the kicking advantage here. The teeps to the body are going to be huge because Tony Ferguson was laying those on Justin Gaethje. Not only him, Khabib was laying those on Gaethje as well. And we know from the Eddie Alvarez fight that Gaethje has a hard time against body shots. He puts up his guard high to his head, but it exposes the body. So the front kicks to the body can really mess with Gaethje and start to gas him out in the fight, hurting Gaethje's cardio. And eventually those can go up to the face. If Oliveira lands enough front kicks to the body early, he eventually could come up to the head with them. And Oliveira's jabs are going to have to be used in this fight often, offsetting Gaethje constantly because, as we've seen before, Gaethje will lose posture in front of jabs. Sometimes he'll counter them, sometimes he'll parry and come in there with a big right overhand to knock you out. And Oliveira's gonna have to be wary about that. Gaethje's biggest chances of hurting him are countering his punches and leg kicks, and he usually leans in with his punches when he does so. So the jabs are gonna have to be timed well from Oliveira to not get countered, and whenever he breaks Gaethje's posture by making him lean and dip to one side heavily, which is done so often against Chandler, against Khabib, against Tony Ferguson, that's a path for Oliveira to get around to his back and choke him out. That's probably the biggest thing for Oliveira in this whole fight. Get to the back whenever this happens. Whether he could shoot it for a takedown and get under, then around to the back, or simply tie him up in the clinch and try to find a way around. But these things have to be perfect with how powerful Justin Gaethje is because Gaethje hits hard. Oliveira does not have good boxing defense. He doesn't move his head. That's the ultimate way that Justin Gaethje could find his chin. He could literally just throw something from a distance, get aggressive on Oliveira, throw something big, and land it on him. One of the only guys he can actually do that to. And if he lands the right hand, a left hook will probably follow, and that could put Charles Oliveira out because usually one punch is not enough. If he could put a combination together like that, the left hook is not going to be seen by Oliveira and he might just get flatlined by it. Not only that, if Oliveira gets too pressuring, Justin Gaethje might counter him easily for it. That is if Gaethje can keep his posture correct. If he stays composed under the pressure, he will be able to find his counterpunching against Charles Oliveira. Because I don't know how many punches Oliveira can take from Gaethje, man. So as you can see in the fight, the danger level from Gaethje's striking is so massive, Oliveira makes one mistake and this could probably be over. On the other side, as soon as it goes to the ground, this fight's most likely a wrap. Oliveira's most likely going to choke him out or snap some limb or something, because Gaethje's BJJ is just almost non-existent. Whenever he hits the ground, he turns around and gives up his back. Oliveira's going to grab onto it and choke him out very quickly. That is only if Oliveira can get him to the ground, and I don't know how he's necessarily going to do that, unless his takedowns have become that strong, where his body lock slams and double leg takedowns are able to get through Gaethje, then Gaethje's going to be the trouble. If Gaethje cannot defend Oliveira's takedowns, this fight's over. This is going to be one of the easiest fights in Oliveira's entire career. If he can defend the takedown, now Gaethje has a huge chance of winning here, because the way that Oliveira's going to have to get that choke in is now on the feet. He has to break the posture. Kind of similar how he did against Dustin Poirier. He shot in a straight right, got under the counter shot, around to the back, jumped on the back, and choked him. And that's why this fight is so hard to predict. Oliveira has many tools to win here. His offensive striking is phenomenal. His submission game is unlike anybody else in UFC history. His takedowns are strong. He's long, athletic, he's powerful, he's fast, he has crisp technique. But on the other side, he has no defense. Gaethje hits super hard. Gaethje has a really good chin. He's not going to get put down easily. This fight's going to come down to decision making with the least amount of errors. Who makes the first intelligent move? In my prediction for this fight, I'm going to go with Charles Oliveira. And I'm going to go by a second round submission. I think he might offset Gaethje enough early in the fight, land a lot of body shots, probably even get into the clinch and land elbows and knees, which he does extremely well. Might try to trip him out from there after those, work the body a lot, land a bunch of the jabs from a distance, and keep range. Don't get too crazy with the pressure. And from there, I think he will be able to get around to the back, similar to how he did against Dustin Poirier, and choke him out. Him knocking out Gaethje is not out of the question. That is not out of the question at all. I think he could put Gaethje down with a head kick, a knee, or something. So second round submission for Charles Oliveira. That's my prediction here, and he is actually a favorite. Not a huge favorite. I think it's closer than they're giving it, because I believe Justin Gaethje has a huge chance of winning here. For all the Charles Oliveira fans, the thing that you might not going to like is Oliveira is actually a favorite. Yeah, he's the favorite, which means that his power is not as strong now, because Oliveira as an underdog is another monster. Him as a favorite, he might not be the same guy, but you might have a chance because he is a smaller favorite than he was earlier. Before, he was like a minus 180, close to even 200 of a favorite. More people are starting to bet on Justin Gaethje, maybe because the casual fans know him more than Oliveira, and he was on some of the more popular podcasts, such as, the Nelk Boys podcast and stuff. So it seems like more people are betting on Gaethje, which is pretty good for a lot of people who are betting on Charles Oliveira. Best place to go is mybookie.ag. That's where everybody's going to have the best lines in the business and constantly are moving. They're updating live. And when you look at the odds of finishes here, Justin Gaethje to win by a knockout, TKO, DQ, or a submission is a plus 185. Most likely that's how he's going to win. It's hard to see Gaethje actually winning by a decision. So more likely than not, if you're going with Justin Gaethje, might as well just go with him finishing the fight. It's better on the odds as well. And for those who are betting on Charles Oliveira, seeing him win by a decision is something that's very rare. He hardly ever gets to the final bell. Him winning by a finish is a minus 110. And that's not only for this fight, there's some interesting odds throughout the whole thing. The one, of course, that I don't agree with is the Rose Namajunas, Carla Esparza betting lines. Rose is over a 2-1 favorite. In fact, she's increasing as a favorite as time is going on. Before, she wasn't even a minus 200. Now she's a minus 215. Pretty crazy, man. It is a close one. I can see Rose winning it, but people are really counting out Carla Esparza on this one. Michael Chandler's a minus 360 over Tony Ferguson, plus 285. He is the biggest favorite on the entire card, and that's sad, man. I don't want to see Tony Ferguson get washed like that. The one that's really interesting, I know a lot of people are kind of torn on, is Rennie Brown versus Chaos Williams. It's a pick'em. A lot of people are riding on Chaos Williams, and a lot of people are riding on Rennie Brown. Rennie Brown doesn't really have a great chin, but he has great offensive tools. Chaos Williams is super powerful, very tough, and technically looking better every single time. I do slightly disagree with the Tracy Cortez and Melissa Gatto fight. I slightly lean to Gatto's side. It's most likely not going to be one-sided. Gatto is undefeated. She is good on the ground. She has better striking, I believe, than Cortez. But Cortez is scrappy. She can scramble, which is going to make it quite competitive on the ground. I just think Gatto has more tools to work with. And honestly, for the rest of the odds, they look pretty spot on in my opinion. And man, the parlays are going to look crazy on this one. There's multiple different ways you can really put these picks together to win big. And I got my own method. I think I know what I'm going to go with here. So as you can see, there's a lot of opportunity to gain on MyBookie's betting lines. And I highly recommend you guys checking it out. Get your first deposit bonus, where MyBookie will match up your first deposit all the way up to $1,000. To activate this, use the promo code WEASEL. That's WEASLE. Remember to visit mybookie.ag if you're looking to bet on these fights. Very good odds on this one. And MyBookie will help you win big. So I hope you guys enjoyed the predictions, and if you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. If you enjoyed my content, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.